Good morning, everyone. In the readings today, we have these words: "They shall eat, and there shall be some left over," says the prophet Elisha. And Jesus says, after the multiplication of the 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, "Gather the fragments left over so that nothing is wasted." They collected them and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves that had been more than they could eat. Did you know that this account of multiplication of the loaves and fish is related 6 times in the Gospels? It's in every one of the Gospels once, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and it's in 2 of them twice, 6 times in the 4 Gospels, more than any other event. What does that tell you? Tell you that it's very important, right? This can only mean that it was seen as very important by Jesus and the gospel writers. So what is the important message here? Well, besides referring to the Eucharist in John's gospel, the multiplication of the loaves and fish and the fact that more than enough is left for everybody and everybody had their fill means that there is always an abundance in God's economy. Everyone has enough. Scarcity of this world's goods is a myth. It's not true. There is not scarcity. An author by the name of Lynn Twist, the author of The Soul of Money, identifies 3 core myths that keep us locked in an economy of scarcity. Number 1, the 3 myths are: number 1, there is not enough to go around. Number 2, somebody's going to be left out. And number 3, if there's not enough for everyone, then taking care of myself and my own people, even at others' expense, seems unfortunate, but unavoidable and somehow valid. These false myths go along with the idea that more is better, which drives a competitive culture of accumulation, acquisition, and greed. It distracts us from living more mindfully and richly with what we have. We judge others based on what they have and miss the immeasurable inner gifts they bring to life. Our drive to enlarge our net worth turns us away from discovering and deepening our true self-worth. The belief that we need to possess always more is the driving force for much of the violence and war, corruption and exploitation on earth. In the campaign to gain more things, we often pursue our goals at all costs, even at the risk of destroying whole cultures and peoples. That's just the way it is, we say, and there's no way out, as the myth goes. There's not enough to go around. More is definitely better, and the people who have less, too bad for them, but it can't be helped. Let me ask you this question. Do you think God would make a world where there's not enough for everyone? Think about that. Do you think God, who created all his people and loves them, would make a world where there's not enough for everyone? I don't think so. That wouldn't be my God. This author, Lynn Twist, says in her book, this myth of scarcity justifies the greed, prejudice, and inaction that scarcity fosters in our relationship with money and the rest of the human race. For generations, it protected the early American slave trade, from which the privileged majority built farms, towns, business empires, and family fortunes, many of which survive today. For more generations, it protected and emboldened institutionalized racism, sex discrimination, and social and economic discrimination against other ethnic and religious minorities. In our fixation with scarcity, we abandon our human potential and the possibility of contributing to a thriving, equitable, healthy world. We have to be willing to let go of, that's just the way it is, even if just for a moment, to consider the possibility that there isn't a way it is or a way it isn't. There is just the way we choose to act and what we choose to make of circumstances. Can we recognize that better comes from not more, but deepening our experience of what's already here, what's already there? Rather than growth being external and acquiring and accumulating money or things, can we redefine growth to see it as a recognition of and appreciation for what we already have? It is a fundamental law of nature that there is enough, but it is finite. But its finiteness is no threat. It creates a more accurate relationship that commands respect, reverence, and managing those resources with the knowledge that they are precious and in ways that do the most good for the most people. Knowing that there is enough of everything inspires sharing, collaboration, and contribution. God as Trinity, mystery of the Trinity, reveals an economy of grace, overflowing love, generous gifts, and abundance. The gospel stories of multiplication clearly show a worldview of abundance. When Jesus feeds a crowd with very little food, he's revealing the nature of spiritual reality, which we're all here for, right? Notice that the apostles advised Jesus against it. They say, but how will 2 fish and 5 loaves be enough for so many? They, like most of us, were living in a worldview of scarcity. In every multiplication story, the gospel writer emphasizes that there is always much left over, which should communicate the point: the universe always has more than enough of itself to give if our minds and hearts are open. Simply observe seeds, spermatozoa, and the life cycle of rain and stars. There's always a superabundance in God's economy if we but trust him and are generous with what we have. America's unhealthy economics and politics persist because we largely operate out of our worldview of scarcity, which leads to actual scarcity. In the myth of scarcity, there's not enough land, health care, water, money, and housing for all of us, and there are never enough guns to keep us safe, all of which is not true. As many have said, there's more than enough for our need, but never enough for our greed. In the midst of structural stinginess and overconsumption of our present world, how do we change consciousness and operate from mercy and graciousness? The problem is exacerbated by the fact that the mind is apparently unable to imagine anything infinite or eternal, which is God. So it cannot conceive an infinite love or a God whose mercy is everlasting, or an abundance of grace. Only a personal experience of unconditional, unearned, and infinite love can move us from the normal worldview of scarcity to the divine world of infinite abundance. That's when the doors of mercy blow wide open. That's when we begin to understand the scale-breaking nature of grace. But briefly now, I want to talk to you about the reason that your diocese and your pastor invited me here today to talk to you about our Brazilian missionaries. We work in Mexico and Colombia in very poor areas where there's a lot of unemployment, where men have to leave home in order to find work. This has a bad effect on family life, as you can well imagine, with no men around, many of whom come to this country in order to provide for their families. It makes it even harder when they are deported for lack of papers. There's also a lot of poverty and hunger in elderly people who lack medical care and medicines where we work. Also, there is a lack of quality education. For all these problems, with your help in the second collection today, we try to make a difference. We have food banks and medical clinics where we try to help with food and medicines. We also have medical personnel who volunteer their services and supply donated medicines. This is especially necessary for the elderly, sick, and infirm, whom we honor today, the Day for Grandparents and Elderly. On the top of this, we also have built a very successful school in Cali, Colombia, in a very poor neighborhood, where young people who have the talent and desire are able to access quality education. And this school for the poor has received national recognition in Colombia for the quality of its education, where most of the students now make it into university, whereas before they didn't even finish high school. We've recently turned this school over to the government. Their parents, of course, are required to pay the little they can and work together with the school and the church to further the education of their children and promote their maturing as Christians. So, my friends, please help us to reverse some of these evils by donating to our missions in the second collection today. I thank your pastor for allowing me to come here, and I thank you in advance for your help and prayers. All these masses I'm going to withdraw.